Welcome to Live at the Museum. We're coming to you today from our Mitchell repository. We're here in the Large Technology Workshop. I'm also here with two of my colleagues, curator Laura Cook.
Hi everyone.
And conservator Karen Wag.
Hi.
And we're going to be having a quick chat, well, maybe not a quick chat, about the Lincoln Park Dairy Milk Wagon that you can see behind us. Before we get started, as always, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're filming today, the Ngunnawal, Ngunnawal and Ngambri people of Canberra. I would like to pay my respect to their elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to any and all First Nations people here present and joining us via the live stream. So, Laura, would you mind introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about how you came to be involved with the Lincoln Park Dairy Milk Wagon?
Sure. Hi everyone. It's my pleasure to be here. My name is Laura Cook and I'm a curator here at the National Museum of Australia. So my job is to research objects held within our National Historical Collection and investigate the provenance and background of objects which are intended for exhibition. So it was my great pleasure to work on this object, which was included in our Spirited Australia's Horse Story exhibition back in 2013.
Spirited was a lot of fun as an exhibition. I think that's the first time we've had people camping on site with all of their horses. We had the Boggy Creek Horse Show. It was a lot of fun. Karen, do you mind telling us a little bit about conservation, how you fit into the museum, and also how you came to be involved with the milk wagon?
Sure. Hi Penny, hi Laura. So as a conservator, we look after the objects in the museum's collection. So that includes getting them ready for display, ensuring that they're stored correctly for their preservation, and also undertaking treatments, like the really involved treatment that we did on this particular object 6 years ago.
Wonderful. So we've got a quick pre-record that goes into a little bit more detail on the Lincoln Park Dairy Milk Wagon. If you have any questions that come up while you're watching the pre-record, please pop them in the live stream straight away so that we can get to them as soon as we come back from the live stream. And we will be right back in just a moment.
Welcome to the National Museum of Australia. My name's Laura Cook and I'm a curator here. Here we are among the carcoons, and today we've taken the carcoon off one of the objects. This is my favourite object. This is the Lincoln Park Dairy Milk Wagon. This is a 1940s milk wagon which was used by the Thai family, who were the proprietors of the Lincoln Park Dairy in Essendon. Essendon was then an outer suburb of Melbourne. So you can see the Thai family name on the side of this milk wagon in the most beautiful red and gold sign writing. Hugh Thai established the Lincoln Park Dairy back in the 1920s, and at that point he would have delivered milk using a two-wheeled medium weight cart using a light horse, and the milk would have been stored in two churns at the rear of the cart, and the milkman would have scooped the milk from the milk and run it through to billies which people would leave on their driveways. One of the most important features of this milk wagon is the sign on the back which says pure pasteurised milk, and this really gives us an insight into the wagon's reason for being. So back in the 1940s, public health was at the forefront. There was a typhoid outbreak and people were also fearful of developing polio symptoms. Pasteurisation was seen as a solution over fears over the contamination of milk. But this also came with an unexpected change to the Thai's business. Going from churns to bottles meant that the load that the horse had to pull was much heavier. So the Thais responded to this social change in a really interesting way. They commissioned this wagon from a coach builder by the name of Bill Knight, who operated in Bendigo. And this is a really innovative design. It is well balanced across the central axle, and there's a recessed section in the middle, which means that the milkman can duck from side to side, dropping off milk bottles as the horse moved down the centre of the street. This wagon was capable of managing heavy loads, and it also meant that it could carry a greater number of crates, meaning that the milkman could get the job done faster. The sharp-eyed among you might have spotted the name Bernie Dingle in tiny letters on the back of the wagon. So Bernie was the apprentice of the master coach builder who built this wagon back in the 1940s, and as time went on, Bernie took on a greater responsibility for maintaining and repairing the wagon. So a good horse was essential to the Thais' business, and the Thais and their horses had the most beautiful connection between them because they needed to work together every day. The Thais used Clydesdales in their business. The horses could be trusted implicitly to know the route perfectly, and this came in very handy in the mornings when the milkman was perhaps a little bit hungover or they were a little bit sleepy. The horse would know the route perfectly. So Katie and Princess weren't only prized for their personalities. One local resident told me a funny story about how the roses in the area were among some of the best in the suburb, and that is because of Katie and Princess's contributions. As the decades went on, demand began to dwindle, and by 1987 the Thais were only delivering to a few hundred houses. As they couldn't make their wages, they had to cease deliveries using this horse-drawn wagon. Ian Buckles was a local resident who purchased the wagon directly from the Thais after they ceased deliveries. Ian always intended to restore the wagon and dismantled it, but in February 2013 the museum was lucky enough to acquire it from Ian. It arrived at the museum as a giant jigsaw puzzle. For me, one of the most special things about this milk wagon is its immense intangible value. As a curator, I feel very lucky that I was able to go into the Essendon and Moonee Ponds community and engage with the local residents who lived there and remembered this milk wagon. People spoke to me of that dreamy effect of hearing the clip-clop of horses' hooves along the road during the early hours, and their pride as a community as preserving this practice long after many other deliveries ceased. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm now going to pass over to my colleague Karen.
Thanks, Laura. Hi, I'm Karen Wagg and I'm a conservator here at the National Museum of Australia. I'm excited today to be revisiting this object, which is one of the most exciting conservation projects I've undertaken here at the museum. So the Lincoln Dairy milk cart did not look the way it looks now when it first arrived at the museum. The passage of time and exposure to the elements are some of the biggest factors in the deterioration of objects. So especially when you've got a lot of different materials present, like timber surfaces, metal and paint. These are all expanding and contracting at different rates with changes in relative humidity and temperature. So in the case of the Lincoln Dairy milk cart that was stored for many decades in an outdoor shed in Victoria, where there's thousands of seasons in one day, all of those causing the paint to lift away from all those surfaces. So it was in quite a state by the time it arrived at the National Museum. When the cart came to the museum, it had been dismantled and was in hundreds of pieces. But before we could even think about putting it back together, we had to stabilise the paintwork. Because it was in such bad condition, it required a very considered process and treatment, which took many months. All of the paint was brittle and curling away from all of the surfaces. So first we had to relax that paint, which we did with heat in the presence of moisture. We did this with heated spatulas and damp blotter and even commercial steamers. So once the paint was relaxed, it could be coaxed back into place and re-adhered with conservation grade adhesives. So this conservation project required the skills of many different professionals. We had paintings conservators and large technology experts who all bring something different. And it took 6 months for us all to get the cart fully stabilised and reassembled and exhibition ready. So one of the highlights for me personally was when I was cleaning some of the discoloured varnish off one of the back panels of the cart, and the words "for pure pasteurised milk" became visible once more. One of the really rewarding parts of the project was finding little bits of paint that had fallen off and accumulated in the base of the cart, and then based on the line work on them, we were able to reattach them like a puzzle piece. It's really rewarding being a conservator because we make it possible for things to survive into the future so that they're accessible to generations to come. I'm Karen, thanks for watching, and remember, if you want any more information on this project, you can visit the museum's website.
We've already got things streaming in on the live stream, which is really lovely. Ken doesn't have a question, but he remembers a different cart and he grew up in Essendon. Laura, you were saying something about there being multiple delivery vehicles horse-drawn in Melbourne at the time.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting observation. Thanks for that, Ken. I think this illustrates just how densely populated the suburbs were with dairies and horse trades at the time. So after the war, the suburbs were subdivided, and so that each dairy would look after all of the surrounding streets. So they were certainly prevalent on the streets in the morning. And as well, of course, back in those days, all of your perishables were delivered by horse-drawn vehicles. Your ice, or your rubbish was taken away. So horses and wagons of this type were certainly a common sight on Melbourne streets. Yeah,
my mum lived in Fitzroy in the 70s, and they still had the night cartman.
Yes.
She's very grateful for indoor plumbing. We have a question from Alana, and I think this one will go to you, Laura. Is this the last horse-drawn delivery wagon in Melbourne?
Oh, that's a tough question. Look, I don't know the definitive answer to that question. I'm going to go out on a limb here. I'm going to say that I think that this is Melbourne's last horse-drawn delivery wagon, which was in use right up until 1987. But it is perfectly possible that there are other ones that were in use beyond that. And I'd love to hear from any Melbourneites who may know of any other ones. Just let us know in the comments. But, you know, there's a number of reasons why horse-drawn delivery wagons did last as long as they did, and I think possibly that flat topography has a lot to answer for
flat
as well.
Topography and crosswise streets.
Yeah, yeah.
Built for horse-drawn wagons was Melbourne. Hi, Kat. She says, wonderful to see. This was my granddad's cart. Thanks for sharing. Thank you for sharing, Kat.
Thank
it's
you,
always
Kat.
really nice to hear from people who are connected to these objects.
Lovely.
That's wonderful to hear.
It's always really lovely to hear from that. David. We've heard from David before. Hi, David. It's nice to have you here again. Sticking the paint down looks like it would take ages. Do you need a lot of patience to be a conservator? Karen, this one's for you.
Well, yes, thank you, David. And I have to answer that question with a big yes. You do need a lot of patience to be a conservator, but it's also really rewarding, and particularly in a treatment like the one that we did on the milk wagon, where it came in looking in such a poor condition and being able to get it to the point it is at today.
Follow-up question, David and Shakri, why don't we just repaint the cart if it's in bad condition? That's an interesting question, and I'm pretty sure Karen and Laura have some great answers for you.
That is an interesting question. And I guess as conservators, our aim is to stabilise objects. And also we often want to record all of that history. So the wear and the tear and the evidence of use. So that was certainly really important with this object. And it was a really big conversation that we had with our curatorial colleagues in the lead up to the treatment as to what was the goal and how we would preserve the stories.
Yeah, that's right. And I think we really have to be absolutely in sync, don't we, when we embark on a project of this scale. And both of us approach it from a position of knowing that every single element of that object is really important and really needs to be conserved and preserved for future generations. So in this cart we had you know, the pink primer, which was still part of one of the struts on the back, and for me that was really important to illustrate Ian Buckle's restoration project.
That's right. So we're really recording the object from its inception right up until the present day. But it's important to have it stable enough to be able to show it to the public through our exhibitions.
That's great. What types of tools and applications do you use, Karen? That's from Alana.
Lots of different things, and it's really interesting in conservation. We borrow a lot of our tools from other areas, so we use a lot of medical tools. And in this treatment, we actually use syringes and tweezers to apply the adhesives. So the adhesives were sometimes in a gel form, sometimes in a film, and so to get them to where they needed to go, behind those very brittle flakes of paint, we did need some of those special medical instruments.
Hi Ken, autonomous vehicles, the horses were brilliant. Yeah. Yes, I think Laura found that lots of people were very, very fond of the horses, with as she mentioned in the video, but there was some beautiful memories.
Oh, it was just the most beautiful experience talking to the Thais and talking to people who lived along the milk round about their relationship, this ongoing, consistent and long-term relationship with the horse that pulled the Thais milk wagon. And it was just a marvellous and sympathetic relationship where the horse anticipated exactly what the milkman needed to do. The horse would go and stop and go, and it would know the route intimately, and you just can't match that with a motorised vehicle.
Yeah, I can't imagine that self-driving cars would be as lovely to race out and pat in the morning either. The studio wants to know, where did the Thais get their horses? This one would be for you, Laura.
So the Thais actually bred their own horses for use on their milk delivery run. They bred, I think, 1 or 2 young horses every year. They would show them in the Melbourne show, and they would bring them along, teach them and practice in the milk run every morning. And it was a really short amount of time. It was only about 6 weeks or so before the horse would know the milk route intimately and could do it almost by themselves.
There are people I know that don't learn their role that quickly. Jez wants to know, has it been hooked up to a horse to see if it still rides? Oh.
Well, unfortunately, we haven't been able to do that, but I actually think it probably still would. It's nice to know that it's still a functioning vehicle, although unfortunately we can't hook it up to horses.
Yes, yes. And I think there's been this marvellous resurgence, perhaps not of horse-drawn vehicles, but of home deliveries at the moment, particularly in the last few months, where people are getting perishables, bread, milk, that sort of thing delivered to their homes. So who knows, we might see a bit of a revival there.
Absolutely. Hang on, have we got something coming through? Colin remembers that the horses knew their routes and when to stop, which I think would be very handy at 6 in the morning, because I'm never awake at that time. And here we go from the studio. Oh, actually, this is really lovely. How did the community hear about the acquisition, Laura?
Oh, okay. Oh, well, this is a great question. And look, this whole project would not have been possible without the Essendon Historical Society. So right back at the beginning, even before we acquired the cart, we entered into those discussions with our conservation colleagues. But another equally important question was whether we could further research the provenance that was supplied. And so we dug a little bit, and we had started to get an inkling that there was a really good story here. And I ought to pay tribute to my colleague Nicole McLennan as well, who did a lot on this assessment project. So we approached Essendon Historical Society, who were so welcoming and so helpful. They invited me to come down to their beautiful museum at the courthouse in Essendon, plonked me in a room one winter's morning, and basically invited members of the community to come to me. And it was just the most wonderful experience. People were happy to share their stories. I met people who lived along the route. I got a contact who put me in touch with Conway Thai, the milkman. I met Bernie Dingle through Essendon Historical Society as well. And we also, all sorts of other intangible benefits as well. People gave me photographs of the milk wagon in use. They gave me home movies. They offered objects and diary entries. So it was a really wonderful experience. And it's really all down to the helpful nature and the assistance that was offered by Essendon Historical Society.
Well, thank you very much to the Essendon Historical Society. If you have an interest in local history, track down your local historical society and get involved. We're coming to the end of our program, so if you have any final questions, please do send them through. While we're waiting on a couple of extra questions, I actually wanted to ask both of you this is not a two-person job to acquisition and restore a vehicle like this. Who else in your team were involved in the Lincoln Park Dairy Wagon project? Karen, do you want to kick us off? Sure.
So we had a really great team with lots of different people bringing lots of different skills to this project. So I'd love to say a big thank you to Catherine Ferguson and Lily Vermeesh, two of my fellow conservators who worked with me on the paintwork. And then our large technology experts, Cole Ogilvie, Ken Houlihan and Ian Stewart, who have such amazing knowledge of all sort of vehicles, both horse-drawn and automobiles, and they brought that to this project and were able to reassemble it so amazingly.
And yeah, I'm the same. I worked with a really fantastic group of curators, Martha Sear, Nicole McLennan, Jen Wilson, to name but a few, and we all worked together in order to really get to grips with that rich historical provenance. And I think it's been one of the most rewarding projects that we've all worked on, the Spirited exhibition.
We have a question from David, and I think when we have open days out here at Mitchell, David, this is one of the most common questions we get asked about, so I'm going to throw it over to Karen. Can you tell us a bit about the carcoons that we saw in the pre-record?
Well, everyone loves the carcoons, as do I, and they are fantastic. From a preservation point of view, they create a wonderful environment for our vehicles. We can have them custom made up to sort of double-decker bus size, and they sort of just keep anything out that you don't want in there, like dust and things like that, but also sort of control condensation, and they just create a wonderful little micro environment for the object, just to ensure that it is preserved as well as it can be.
They're a lot of fun, and I always feel like they make everything feel a bit like a bouncy castle. It's like a carnival over in the large objects. Jez, again, hi Jez, nice to have you back. Do you know how many milk carts were on the road back in the day? Were they a common sight? Laura, I think this one's for you.
Certainly, without a doubt, they were certainly a common sight. I would estimate there would be upwards of 1,000 delivery wagons on Melbourne's road, probably between the 20s and the 60s, 70s, when many of those delivery routes began to be replaced by motorised transport.
Christine would like to know where we can access some of the stories that we gathered about the Lincoln Park Dairy Wagon. Laura?
There's some information about the Spirited exhibition on our website, so do check that out.
And as we mentioned earlier as well, the Essendon Historical Society, if you're based in Melbourne, they'll have a lot of information. And I think there's a couple of blog posts about the wagon as well. So keep an eye on the stream and we might chuck a couple of links in underneath it. Yeah. This one is from the studio and it is our last question, I'm afraid. So will it be on show at the museum soon?
We would love that.
Yes, yes, any excuse.
So I guess it's sort of, it's nothing concrete as yet, but stay tuned, always sort of, keep up with all of our media going out and you never know.
And keep an eye on the website, there's more information there.
Yeah, unfortunately we can only display about 3% of what we have in the National Historic Collection, so not everything gets to be out all the time. But you never know, you might be lucky. So if you're not watching live or we haven't answered your question, please pop it in the public comments of the YouTube video. If it stays in the stream, we'll lose it and we won't be able to answer it, which would be very disappointing for us and for you. Before we head off, we are going to leave you with a preview of next week's program with our Swain Design Fellow, Adrian Erickson. We'll see you Thursday, 2 p.m. next week.
Creating a social history museum of Australia was never going to be an easy task with such a complicated and contested history. The architects determined that Australia has multiple threads of history, starting with 65,000 years of Aboriginal habitation and colonial history and immigration history, and they wanted to pull together all of these threads and tie them into a knot, to bring together all of our diversity, all of our differences, and form it into a museum. It's a place to reflect and think about where you fit within our culture and our history.